Welcome to the Historical Movies Podcast, a podcast all about movies inspired by history. I'm Ross Evans, I'm an editor, and I'm joined by Professor of Modern History at Liverpool Hope University and historical scriptwriter, Bryce Evans. Bryce, are you receiving me?
Receiving mission control.
And in this episode, we just lost the moon. It's Apollo 13. Gone with the other more famous tagline, which is Houston, we have a problem, but it's not historically accurate because they actually said, Houston, we've had a problem. So that's the first one ticked off. This film, directed by Ron Howard, came out in 1995, and it opens with the lone horn and then military drums, the sound of endeavor, the sound of sacrifice, the sound of 90s America. And this film, I think, Bryce, among other things, it's a great nerds solving problems movie. That's how I see this movie. That's where it really shines for me. How about for you? Yeah,
I think it's the sound, isn't it, of late 20th century American imperialism and, you know, in the spirit of the frontier spirit, of course, what better arena than space. Yes, it's nerds sorting stuff out in confined spaces sort of movie.
Sweaty nerds.
Sweaty nerds. I do believe as well that from accounts of people who've been into space that I've listened to or read, that in this very confined environment, the constant smell is through the recycled air is recycled pooey air. It's dull whiff of excrement is the dominant smell.
Oh, lovely.
A bit like sharing a portaloo with a couple of other lads if you're trying to do a hotbox in a music festival, for example. So it's a nerdy bro movie, I'd say, yeah, with an air of poo.
Well, it does. I mean, it starts off. But I mean, as a sort of balance to that, we do get some of the suburbia, American 1970s suburban life as an introduction. So it begins with that Apollo 11 party scene.
Yeah.
Introduction to the crew. We can see that Tom Hanks, who plays Jim Lovell, is this charismatic, intelligent guy. Then we've got Fred Hayes, that's Bill Paxton, and then Kevin Bacon as top shagger Jack Swigert, who's introduced in a ridiculous double entendre scene with a woman at a party.
But Bill Paxton is dead. I didn't realise Bill Paxton had died. One of our astronaut triumvirs. Yep. Did you realise he died? I didn't even realise that.
Yeah, early 60s, I think. He was 61 or something. Yeah, sadly so.
Yeah.
But as soon as we get all that build up for about 45 minutes, and I've got to say, I felt that I was sort of, maybe because I'm focused on exactly what you've just described, the sweaty nerds aspect of this movie. The first 45 minutes, the first act, it kind of dragged for me. I have seen this film a few times, so maybe that's why. But then we get the Liftoff sequence, great sequence, Ron Howard's favourite sequence he's ever shot, apparently. And as soon as we get Liftoff and Engine 5 shuts down, out come the nerds. Then we've got this little break where they have this broadcast scene, which goes on for way too long. And then at 50 minutes, something goes wrong. And then it's just one problem after the next. We've got a roller coaster all the way to the end.
Mm.
Great fun from minute 50 onwards. It's one of those films where we're on to the next thing, and then we're on to the next thing, and then we're on to the next thing. And it's a great rocket ride of a movie. And then we have at the end a smoking cigars and shaking hands montage, and it's a happy ending. What more do you want from a mid-90s American blockbuster?
Problem solving, lots of problem solving, and weepy, schmaltzy, sentimentalized. God bless America. However, probably necessary to have that early 3/4 of an hour domestic situation. The whole backstory, you know, one fella had a heart condition, one fella had an ear operation, one guy was exposed to rubella, Swigert, allegedly the Casanova of the space program, which ignores the fact, I mean, he was quite unique in that he was unmarried. Let's be clear that a lot of these guys who were married weren't exactly, taking their vows seriously. But that's another story. But you probably need all of that stuff because it is very, again, I think, highly accurate movie. I think even Hanks is a real stickler for accuracy, a real nerd himself, allegedly, in terms of researching the stuff. And as we've discussed before on this venerable pod, you can have great accuracy, but you need a story as well. You need a narrative. You need that bit of schmaltz, that bit of domestic life. At the end, the priest gathered round with the family, placing his hand gently on the child's head to comfort him. You need all that stuff to bring the audience along. Serious point here, because nerdy accuracy is great, but you need a bit of that sentimentalized backstory perhaps as well.
Well, definitely. Otherwise, it's a bit more like a sort of engineering documentary that you'd get on the History Channel. So you have this whole other half of the emotional core of this movie, which is set in the with the family of the astronauts. As I've said, I find the first 45 minutes, because I've watched this movie so many times, I find the first act of this movie a little slow, but you definitely need that as a counterbalance to Dudes in Space. So I think it functions very well as in that respect, as that kind of movie. The priest is actually Ron Howard's dad.
Oh, really?
And the old lady is his mum, and his wife is also in it. And
hang on, how could Ron Howard's dad be a Catholic priest? They can't marry her kids. Oh, he plays.
He's acting.
He's acting.
Well, I say acting. He just sits there, and at one point he puts his hand on someone's shoulder. That's it.
Yeah,
that's it. But the Blanche, the old lady, is his mum, and apparently his wife and his daughter, who's called Bryce. Ron Howard's daughter is called Bryce.
With a Y
and
or
his
an
brother
I?
Clint are also in it. So the whole family Howard are
Well,
in this
I like
movie.
it when there's cameos with family members. My favourite being, of course, Scorsese using his dear old mummy for, especially that great scene in Goodfellas where they've just brutally murdered someone and they go over to hers for a cup of tea. Good for
what
old
do you
Ron
call
Howard.
it? The deer's paw. What's it?
It's hoof.
It's a hoof. A hoof.
Yeah.
It's hoof.
Ron Howard has quite the back catalogue, doesn't he? It's quite the diverse portfolio old Ron has of movies. A lot of comedies, isn't it?
Well, yeah, he started, didn't he, in Happy Days, didn't he? So
he was a child actor, wasn't he?
Yeah. So quite an incredible career. This had a budget of 52 million, made 355 million, massive success at the box office. Nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. We know what film beat that to Best Picture, our beloved Braveheart. I would say this is a better film than Braveheart, but anyway, woe betide me to contradict the Academy. It won for Best Film Editing and Best Sound, both of those, I think, great picks. I've got to say, talking just briefly about the editing, there's some great use of archival material in this, which is cut together very nicely, real TV news reports. And also, that got me thinking that the Apollo flights are so well recorded. You have all of the transcripts. Apparently, a lot of what's said in this movie comes one for one from the transcripts. So, I mean, I think that leads us to a point where, we talk about historical accuracy. This is kind of a unique film in that everything pretty much is recorded about these flights as much as possible, without having cameras in the
you
cabins.
can even listen to I've even been listening to the audio. I don't know if you've listened back to some of the audio.
Some of it, yeah.
You can
put
go
it on at night as a AMSR, whatever those things are called.
Because it's terribly boring, which is why these guys are chosen. And I have to say this, I do find this movie a little bit boring in parts, I have to say. But that's exactly why they're chosen, because they are boring and calm professionals. And if you listen back to that loop of communication, for example, with Mission Control during the accident, I don't know if you've listened back to that.
Yeah.
The calmness is incredible. Allegedly, I've heard that Lowell actually at one point took the sensors off, so ground control couldn't see or couldn't hear how stressed he was.
Okay.
I've heard that. I'm not sure if that's true. But
he does rip off his biomed sensors in this movie at the end, because as you were saying, that Tom Hanks plays. This is actually a perfect role for Tom Hanks as the sort of stoic everyman that he sort of made a career out of. Yeah. And he gives a great performance. He's very believable as a cool, calculated, level-headed astronaut. But at one point he gets fed up, doesn't he, and says, I'm fed up of having the Western world knowing how my kidneys are doing. And that's the point at which he breaks that kind of mold, and you think, yes, Tom, rip him off.
Well, you listen back to and you can get this really easily, and you listen back to that communication loop, and it's so boring. It's so sort of calm. Houston, I'm attaching fuel cell 3 to main B. Oh, negative. Incredible levels of calmness, which is, of course, why they got the job.
So, Bryce, what doesn't this movie give us in terms of history, in terms of historical context? Of course, this is slap bang in the middle of the Cold War. And I was thinking when I watched this, that aspect of it, I mean, they obviously chose not to talk about that, which is completely understandable. But because it was the space race, because they were trying to beat the Russians, what doesn't this movie tell us about the context?
Well, you've got that whole Cold War context. I mean, it's, of course, from Apollo 11, but even in this one, 1970, it's clear, isn't it, that the Soviets have effectively lost the space race, even though they are stressing that they're not interested in rockets going to the moon. We're more interested in establishing an international space station, that kind of stuff. But it's clear that they've lost the space race. Interesting about the Soviet reaction, the Soviets, from what I've read, believed that the Yanks deliberately timed the mission to coincide with Soviet Cosmonautics Day. Which celebrated their own heroes, Yuri Gagarin's, etc., and the 100th anniversary of Lenin's birthday.
Right.
So they were very much thinking of it in those times. But I mean, in terms of competition, that was really over, wasn't it? And I think an interesting detail, without wanting to get sucked into the vortex of sentimentalized schmaltz, which I'm afraid does pervade this movie.
Yeah.
This does have the effect, and I'll return to this later, of humanizing the space race, which could be very male, stale, and nerdy. And illustrating that, I think, again, from what I've read, and I wasn't around in 1970, but it does seem that for a while at least, the world was kind of united in well-wishing, in terms of what was going to happen to these guys. You even had small landlocked African countries offering themselves up as potential landing sites. Even Ross, even the Soviets, from what I've read, and again, I'm not an expert here, even they reached out to an extent to the US government over this stuff. Right. So I suppose it did have an effect of, for a while, thawing that Cold War and humanizing the space race, which, let's be honest, the Soviets had already pretty much lost. Yeah,
it's an interesting point, just thinking that this film does mention that the world is tuning in, and we see that through archive material and so on, but it doesn't have the classic scenes that you might expect of people all around the world. So we go sub-Saharan Africa, middle of Asia,
Big Ben, Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, some posh English guy wearing a deerstalker drinking tea. Oh, Margaret, they've done it. Something like that. It actually doesn't have those scenes. So it's a very American movie in that respect. It doesn't have the scenes I'm thinking of, like at Independence Day, when you see all the alien spaceships. There's a great shot of in the Masai Mara with the tribesmen watching the spaceship come down. It doesn't have those kind of those scenes in it. So
the Arab street with people yelling Allahu Akbar as the UFO appears. That kind of it's just stock footage. No, it doesn't go in for that, and it's better for it actually.
Yeah, it is. NASA was originally given a budget for 10 moon landings. So Apollo 11 was the first, and Apollo 17 was the last one, which was December 1972, and then their budget was cut. In the mid-60s, it was around 4% of all federal spending, NASA, that's an astonishing amount of money. And now it's less than half of 1%, although it's slightly more complicated than that if you adjust for inflation and so on. But I suppose that tells us then, I suppose what we might not get as modern audiences is the fever that people were so interested in this, the huge amount of money that America was pumping into this as a country, and its ability to do that because the government and the people were behind this massive project of exploring space. Whether we can talk about whether it was to do with peaceful exploration or whether it had military connotations.
At this stage, human nature being human nature, everyone's just very jaded of the space race, aren't they? Because someone's actually already been on the moon, and then Apollo 12, your man's almost dancing a jig on the moon. It's been done. I believe a lot of their research and experimentation actually was carried out subsequently with Apollo 14. So the science wasn't lost per se, but in terms of public opinion and perception, I think it probably makes that point, doesn't it, this movie, that the public are a bit tired. Well, everyone's fascinated with space still, especially boys and men, but people are a little bit tired of going to the moon.
Yeah, even by, this is just the third time, and they there's that scene where they can't get a network broadcaster to show the broadcasts that they make in space, which I've got to say, as I said, that scene goes on for way too long, but I think that might be the point, that it's just long and boring, and it takes an accident for the world to take notice. So there's a little bit in this movie about, isn't it a shame that we've lost this collective drive and will to explore the universe, perhaps. I was just looking at the film budget for this was $52 million. The Apollo 13 mission, the entire mission cost, according to NASA, was $375 million, which in today's money is $3.2 billion to get those guys to the moon. So that also speaks, I think, to the willingness of America to. Actually, just makes me think, maybe Stanley Kubrick did film the moon landing. Would have been a hell of a lot cheaper. Well,
it is alluded to in the most recent NASA space movie, which I'll talk about later, which is a rom-com. Another thing we don't really... Well, do we see here? I'd like to hear your opinion on this, actually, because there's this sort of comic scene, isn't there, where they're sending up Günther Wendt, one of the former Nazi... leading technicians on this. He says, "Den we walk and talk on the moon." There's that scene when they're sort of joshing about, but that's maybe something which is not, the slightly problematic issue of Operation Paperclip, the recruiting of Nazi scientist Werner von Braun.
Yeah,
was he still spearheading NASA at this time, or had he just retired?
I think it might be a bit late for him, but as you said,
he was SS.
Yeah, well, that's the amazing other part of this whole thing. Of we should explain that after the Second World War, there was an operation by the Americans and the Soviets to recruit or kidnap the best German scientists, of course, who were working on that most advanced rocketry systems in the world, the V2 rocket and such like. And Werner von Braun is the main... It's like the father of the NASA space program. And as you said, I didn't know he was in the SS. I knew he was in a Nazi, basically. But wow, so he was a full-blown Nazi, not just. He
wasn't just a trifling brown shirt. I can tell you. But yeah, there's that. Now, another question I had for you in terms of perhaps some of the more technical detail of filming. I did read when looking at the making of this movie that about the amount of hours of weightless scenes they had.
Yeah.
Allegedly 6 whole hours of weightless scenes they shot, and they had on many occasions, just when they'd reached the top, as it were, 25 seconds to deliver key lines. Now, is that true, or is that just sort of a movie myth with this?
Yeah, well, as far as I've seen, and reading from I'm trying to think of other examples. Apparently Ron Howard asked Steven Spielberg for advice about how to do that, and he suggested the Vomit Comet, which they call it, which I think they flew 612 parabolas, are they called, when you go up and down, and it gives you about 25 seconds each time. So I think that's basically how you do this before CGI. Of course, it's very difficult, even with CGI, to get that proper weightlessness motion, where your hair stands on end, and it doesn't quite work with CGI. So yeah, that's true. They went full in with the weightlessness scenes. Yeah. I should also mention that you mentioned Günther Wendt, where I think Tom Hanks says, "I wonder wer Günther Wendt," as an introduction. And it's actually, as soon as I saw he was German, I thought he must have been a Nazi, and sure enough, he was.
Of course.
But Fred Hayes, the astronaut that Bill Paxton plays, says he was affectionately known as der Führer of der Launchpad.
Oh, that's not nice.
So there's no kind of pretense that these guys knew exactly where the connection was to Nazi Germany.
I just wanted to discuss for a brief second the fact that, we always on this pod, when looking at historical accuracy, look at sources, don't we? The question of sources. And a lot of this came from Lowell. Is it Lowell or Lowell?
Lovell, I believe.
Lovell, sorry.
Yeah.
Lovell's account of being in space. So I actually have a recording of Lovell reading from his account, from his logbook of when the accident actually occurs. So would you like me to give you that now?
Please.
Yeah.
Wow, music.
Captain's log, 14th of April 1970. Just heard from Mission Control, Burnley have been relegated from First Division. Lost 2-1 away to Derby County. That means Burnley will join Blackpool in Second Division next year. Oh well. Time to make me tea, I think. Just go and put on kettle. Dum-de-dum. Just go over there, put on kettle. Oh, me knobby piles are playing up something wretched up here, I can tell thee. Oh, bugger! Bloody Swiggert's got toaster on, hasn't he? Same time as kettle. Bloody Swiggert, and it's bloody shorted the whole lot, hasn't it? Swiggert! Swiggert, you bastard! Bugger! Houston, we've got problem.
Ah, that was beautiful. And the Oscar goes too. Apparently, Jim Lovell said that Tom Hanks gave a almost perfect portrayal of him in this movie. But that was about 8 times better, Bryce. That was beautiful.
Well, that wasn't me. That was Lovell. That was live. That was a recording of Lovell's log. That's how the accident happened. As people will well know, if you have the kettle on and the toaster at the same time, these things can happen.
Oh, yes, fantastic. I actually read that because it was when they were stirring the oxygen tanks, and they found out in later Apollo missions that they didn't even need to do that. They were solving a problem that didn't exist, so they subsequently found out that the thing that blew part of the spaceship away was an unnecessary thing to do. Well, once I've dried my eyes, Bryce, that was very moving. Should we move on to our set list of questions?
Yes.
So, let's have a look. Oh, actually, before that, 1 or 2 other things I noticed watching this movie. First of all, there's a bit where the daughter is upset because the Beatles have just broken up. I think they broke up 3 days before the rocket launched. But in the background, we hear Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze. And I was thinking, what the hell? When it's because the Beatles, for a very long time, did not allow any of their music to be used in films. So that's why, apparently. Yeah.
Good that they're leveraging in a bit of popular culture there.
Indeed, yeah. So, off to our questions, Bryce. What was your favourite scene?
My favourite scene would have to be, I think, to address a theme we've come up against on this pod before, is a lot of these historical movies perhaps fall into the trap of the great man of history theory. They're all about great men doing great things, which, as you'll know, I don't think is necessarily a good way of looking at history, but it's something we tend to do in the heroic vein. And that brings me to Hanks's the great man, non-great man, heroic but non-individual heroic speech in this. Quote, The astronaut is only the most visible member of a very large team, and all of us, right down to the guy sweeping the floor, are honoured to be a part of it. And he goes on to say, the best part of each one of us, the belief that anything is possible. And I again, without wanting to get too seduced by the schmaltzy Yankee sentimentality of all of this, I think that's quite a good great man, anti-great man thing, isn't it? Because it captures the whole point of this movie is collective endeavour, isn't it? From the guys sweating on the floor to the guys sweating up in their portaloo in space.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, actually. Yeah, I just scribbled down when I was watching this all of those moments. There's a scene where Space Command checks Tom Hanks's maths. There's the great scene where, okay, listen up, people. The people upstairs have handed us this, and we got to come through. The bit where they've got to make a square peg fit in a round hole, which is I love that scene. And there's also that bit where Gary Sinise is trying to get the startup procedure to, with a limited amount of electrical amps. And all of those problem-solving scenes just work very, very nicely. But my favourite scene is actually, well, it's more of a sequence, but it's very well edited. It's when they carry that thing that makes the round air filters work in the square, whatever it is. It looks like a lunchbox with a vacuum cleaner, a lead coming out of it. When the nerds are carrying that to put on Ed Harris's desk, that starts this whole 5-minute sequence where they cut between Space Command, the astronauts building that device, old archive from stuff from the 1970, Jim's home life, and all of that's cut together really well, really pacey, and it works great. You see all these sections through. It's about 5 minutes long, and it ends with the CO2 light going off. And I thought that perfectly summarizes this film, that they solve a problem, and here are all of the people that are involved in that one scene being solved and what it means. So we get out of the spaceship, and we see all the people around it. So coming back to your point about a sort of antidote to the great man of history, that was my favourite sequence. What's your favourite performance in this movie?
I think there's some really good performances throughout here, and it's obviously like a bit like Saving Private Ryan and then Band of Brothers. It's like a passion project for Hanks, and I think he performs really well. I actually like Ed Harris.
Yeah.
On the ground, sleeves rolled up, and I just think it's a really kind of believable performance from Harris, who's an actor I really quite enjoy in a lot of things. What about yourself?
Yeah, Ed Harris for me, definitely. I think the other cast are great. I was missing the Bill Paxton, there's that famous scene in Aliens where he's saying, "It's game over, man," which is just, I would love to see him in space going, "Oh great, the oxygen tank's ruptured. It's game over, man."
No, because they're not
but
ruffled.
He's not quite whiny. He's not very whiny.
They're calm. They're calm, cool, calm and collected.
Yeah, and then of course Kevin Bacon has this great conspiracy theory halfway through the movie where he's like, "They're not telling us, man. We can't get back, but they're not going to tell us," which is a subplot which isn't delved into more, precisely because apparently, according to all three of them, it never happened. They never questioned that. So,
well, Lovell was a lot happier with the accuracy of this version than there'd been other television movies, etc., hadn't there? And he was a lot happier with this, which is probably again testament to the movie. I was going to ask you, maybe this is a cul-de-sac we don't want to go down, but Howard has done quite a lot of documentaries, hasn't he? And some parts of this, what you've just described there, and you think, I couldn't help but think this would work very well as a documentary, actually. And is it more of a documentary than a feature film? But hey, let's not go down that particular.
Well, I will just say, coming back on our last episode about Lumumba, this is a much better version of a director that also does documentaries, incorporating aspect of documentaries into a fiction film, with the archive, with the real transcripts of what the astronauts said. It's done. This is the way to do it.
Well, yeah, agreed.
When I was looking up which historical figure from the movie should do the DVD commentary, I discovered that Jim and Marilyn Lovell do the DVD commentary on the DVD for this, so it may have answered the question. So
that's going to be a boring watch. I have to say that would be really boring to listen to them.
Well, I also just wrote down the Soviets for this.
Well, yeah, the Americans timing this to coincide with Cosmonautics Day. How dare they?
Yeah. What's the best companion film to watch with this one?
Right. Well, this might surprise you, but I recently went to see a rom-com called Fly Me to the Moon. The whole point of Fly Me to the Moon, which is a rom-com just out this year, 2024, is you've got Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum in it, and the whole point is, which is touched on in this movie, the nerds at NASA just cannot translate what they do in human terms, which is really the point of Apollo 13. It humanizes the whole thing, and I think that's the point of the movie, along with perhaps the theme of coping with disappointment. But anyway, I don't want to go down that cul-de-sac either. But in Fly Me to the Moon, this recent rom-com, the whole NASA male nerdy inability to communicate with the general public, who are jaded of space, is embodied by monosyllabic slab of meat Channing Tatum,
square-headed
Tatum, whose life is transformed and who finds love with PR guru Scarlett Johansson, who comes in and sexes up NASA. But there's a serious point here, because the funding and the political will that they needed, especially from key senators, was starting to wane sort of around this time, wasn't it? And in the movie Fly Me to the Moon, this rom-com, do you have scenes where, Channing Tatum, he just doesn't care, and he's seen men die on his watch. He's not interested in PR or
jaded,
getting out the begging bowl. Yeah, he's jaded with a capital J. And so when they have senators visit the NASA program, he can't be arsed. But Scarlett Johansson then runs in and says, did they get the senator down from Texas, and he's going to be key to whether they're going to get the funding, and he's not happy. And then Scarlett Johansson says, oh, well, Senator Oil Wells, I just loved your speech in the latest House committee hearings. Won't you come and have a walk with me? And of course he's like, oh, mercy me. Yes, I will, little lady. And then they'll get the money. So the whole point is that the nerdy slabs like Channing Tatum at NASA are unable to sex things up, but Scarlett Johansson can. And I suppose that brings me back to the point of Apollo 13. It was a win from a failure, wasn't it? Because it humanized the whole space program. Yeah,
there was a movie, I haven't seen it, called First Man, released a few years back with God, what's his name? Who's the guy in Beyond the Pines, Bryce? What's his name?
Place Beyond the Pines. I always call him, what, you mean the lead guy? I always call him Mumbly Joe. But his name is not Mumbly Joe. The guy in
in La La Land. And
La La Land.
Ryan Gosling.
Gozzers.
My
Gozzers.
God.
Gozzers.
It's too early in the morning. Gozzers plays Neil Armstrong. There's also Gravity, which I'm not a massive fan of, I've got to say. But there is a film from 1983 called The Right Stuff, which is about the test pilots that are engaged in US post-war research in high-speed aircraft and laying the foundations for the Apollo program, starring Ed Harris. So it's sort of like a prequel to this, if you like. It was apparently a box office bomb, but it was nominated for 8 Oscars, and it won 4. And I've never heard of it, but it's called The Right Stuff, so that's a good choice. And then I also thought, if you've got a movie where you're just constantly jumping from the next problem to the next problem to the next problem, it's very similar, actually. Crimson Tide. I always want to squeeze a submarine movie in here.
Yeah.
Load of dudes stuck in a tube for like an hour and a half, and it's the next problem, and the next problem, and the next problem. I think it would probably be quite a good watch if you like this movie.
Yeah.
Similar vein. What did you give this out of 10?
I gave it actually a 7 out of 10. I find like a lot of the patriotic American stuff sticks in my craw quite a lot. However, I think you elaborate on this. It's a good example of how to effectively make a documentary into a feature film. It is in that sort of, I suppose, again, maybe we don't get into this now, but there's that sort of quite patriotic vein of late 90s American movies leading up to, you know, the 2001 and then the subsequent War on Terror. And you can't help but, very bad historical practice, apply a bit of hindsight and think about that whole welter of American patriotism in the broader period and then leading up to what happens at the turn of the century. But for all the sort of caveats there, I do think it works quite well as a movie, and it is. But I was bored. I'll admit, I was bored in quite a lot of places, which is frequent even emotion.
Sorry, even after something goes wrong and it just goes on, and you know, it's like a roller coaster ride. Were you bored?
Well, you do know what's going to happen.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, you do, but yeah, no, I'm going to give it a good solid 7.
Okay, I gave it 8.5 because I often enjoy, I think, American 90s movies, because I don't know whether this is true, and it'd be interesting to get your opinion on this, because it's a period in American history where they've, quote-unquote, won the Cold War, and it's before 9/11, which sort of enters America into another period, relatively good economy, and it's sort of like America is absolutely top dog, can do what it wants. And the movie Hollywood reflects in its confidence of storytelling. From an American perspective, a lot of those movies in the 90s, American movies, are enjoyable because they're so confident and not
in the best
introspective.
way.
They're just proudly exploring a topic.
In the best way, they're very upbeat, sort of restoring your faith in Western democracy. I mean, another really good example of that is, in terms of, we're doing movies here, but in terms of television series, is The West Wing, for example. It's very much of that genre. It's very much a crusading, upbeat, you certainly know who the goodies are. But, you know, we could sit here and poke holes in that all day long, couldn't we? But I agree with you that sometimes you can just sit there and just suspend your disbelief and enjoy that spirit of filmmaking.
For our Hall of Fame, I've got 3 options for you. Firstly, Gene Kranz's White Waistcoat.
Okay.
Which arrives from his wife in a cake box, apparently. No. Okay. on the shortly before.
What
the
others can I have? Go on.
The command module that landed in the ocean, which both the waistcoat and the command module you can see in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum.
I've been there and I didn't see those. Okay, go on.
Okay. My pick is the thing that they build that converts square oxygen filters to round oxygen filters. The thing that looks like a lunchbox covered in gaffer tape. That's my pick for the Hall of Fame.
Very good. We've talked before on this pod about good faces in movies. Well, for my Hall of Fame, I've got a choice between heads. What would I put in the Hall of Fame? Gary Sinise's head. In general, I find fascinating, just everything about it. Or Ed Harris's very square-cut head. So in the Battle of the Heads, Sinise's head, which is just singular, and Ed Harris's incredibly square-cut head. Yep. Which of those will you choose?
Well, I didn't realise you were a phrenologist, Bryce, that if you got your calipers in the background there measuring people's skulls. I would go with maybe the blonde Harris buzz. Well, it's not a buzz cut; it's square.
Buzz cut, yeah.
Chiseled jaw American square heads. Maybe that's what. Just head profiles for our Hall of Fame. What would happen in the sequel if there was one? Well, I suppose it would be Apollo 14.
They get to the moon. Your man makes it to Congress before he sadly dies. The disappointment is slaked by later successes.
Yeah. Did you have anything for Suits Corner, Bryce? I'm
afraid I haven't got anything for Suits Corner because in a way it's just too easy. You read reviews of this and it's just the best thing since sliced bread, and there's just too much of it to choose from. For Pedantry Corner, no military historians involved this week. We'll get back to you. Sorry, military historians. We'll poke fun at you in a later episode. The bang when Swigert stirs the oxygen tanks actually took place 95 seconds later. It wasn't instantaneous. Have I been calling Swigert? I've managed to mispronounce all of their names, I think, on this podcast. Swigert, not Swigert. Yeah, go on. Yeah, okay. Swigert, well, do you know what? That's the sort of detail which would put some people into apoplexy.
Yeah. Also, the fact that Jim Lovell is actually left-handed is also another one I have. And I think that's pretty much it, other than to say that at the end of this movie, Tom Hanks ponders, when will we go back to the moon? And according to NASA, in September 2026. So
okay.
It's slated.
I'll stick that in the diary.
Yeah, so maybe... Well, let's hope everything goes well. And if it doesn't, we'll have another enjoyable movie to watch, Bryce.
Yeah.
So that was Apollo 13. And thanks very much for listening to the Historical Movies Podcast. And we'll see you in the next episode.